for each of you, whether you are here in the sanctuary or participating from home. I wish you a Shana Tova, a good year of 5781. The last half of 5780, by most measures, hasn't been so good. But you are with me, whether here in the sanctuary or from home, so I am grateful for that and hope that you too are grateful for being able to participate in this service and observe Yom Tov even in a time of pandemic. 8 or 9 centuries ago, there was a group of pious Jews in Germany who became known as Hasidei Ashkenaz, which means the pious German Jews. Like their Christian neighbors, they were extremely concerned about sin. And like most of their Christian neighbors, they were not very much fun. Of course, life in that time was not much fun. We Jews at least had Shabbat, Sukkot, Purim, Pesach intended to be joyous times. But most of life was very difficult. And among other things, these Jews developed the idea that life was a trial. And they were always on trial. This is what they thought. Sin is inevitable, so we better do extra. Strive to do whatever extra good deeds we can. Learn as much Torah as we can. Pray with as much fervor as we can muster. And that's what they did. Plus, if they actually committed a really serious sin, they would go to one of their rabbis who would prescribe a penance, but not just a few prayers or a confession. No, no, no. They would undergo serious mortifications, for they believed it was better to undertake such punishment in this world than to risk facing it in the next. Now, I am not sorry that this group did not survive as a strong influence in Judaism. But the idea of life being a trial, a test, was actually rooted in Torah and in Jewish experience. Our Torah portions today and tomorrow are about Abraham, of whom our rabbi said that God gave him 10 tests. And tomorrow's reading is about the last of them, the most excruciating, the binding of Isaac. It begins, God tested Abraham. Do we understand exactly how that test worked or why God asked him to prepare to sacrifice his son? I've read it over and over. I've read many explanations and given a few sermons about it, and I cannot claim to understand it fully. But this one thing most commentators believe is clear from the story: Abraham passed the test. Our Machzor asks us to look at ourselves as if we were on trial, to look at our deeds as if they were written in a book of life. I don't literally believe that God writes all our deeds in such a book, or that God has a bunch of angelic clerks keeping track of our every action. But because it is suggested to me that I have a final exam coming someday, and at my age, you never know, but, it could be this year or any year, but it will happen. Because I think about that on this day in this season, I am reminded that my deeds matter. How I choose to live matters. Even though I am sure that I enjoy life much more than the Hasidei Ashkenaz did, which is not really saying much, it might just be important for me to look at my character and my actions more seriously, more humbly, more carefully. It must seem to many of us that the past 6 months and those that will follow are a trial, a test of our patience, our resolve, our concern for each other. Do we know why this trial is taking place? Not really. We know that pandemics happen. We just hope that they don't affect us or our families. But why God created a very imperfect world where people die from a virus sometimes randomly, why many of us can't go to work or to school, have maybe a year chopped out of our lives, why most of us can't even come to synagogue on this day to thank God for having gotten through the past year, for being able to stay safe. Why God created the world we have is beyond my understanding, and I suspect that even much wiser rabbis than I cannot claim to understand it. When you listen to the radio, you will occasionally hear that long beep. And when it is over, the announcer says, "This has been a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test." We all know that that's not a test for us. When there is a real emergency, a hurricane, a pandemic, a personal crisis, that is a test. We don't know why we're being tested, and because we're not biblical Jews, but modern Jews, we understand that God isn't imposing it on you personally, but it's a test all the same. And in that moment or that year, we are on trial. Many of you will remember these lines from our Rabbi Jack Siegel. "Mile by mile is a trial, yard by yard is hard, bit by bit is a cinch." Well, it's true, bit by bit is more of a cinch, but sometimes every step on the journey feels like a trial. We can't say why we are tested, except that it seems to be built into the framework of human existence. The more fruitful question is, how do we respond to a test? We should remember that normal life is often a test. A man sees that making a living is challenging, so he rationalizes cutting corners. A woman feels a strange attraction to a man other than her husband and begins a relationship. A student takes an exam and has a cheat sheet up his sleeve. A baseball team. Oh, now we're getting serious, right? Yeah. Because our 2017 Houston Astros taught us that you can win the World Series, but fail the test. Even in a normal year, life is a test. We always seem to have a lot of work to do in these 10 days. Many of you remember the entertainer Steve Allen, who once said, "I'm loyal to a fault. I've got a great many faults, and I'm loyal to every one of them." Rabbi Vernon Kurtz of Chicago tells of knowing a man who had an income of over $1 million a year, and yet he was always miserable. And when asked why he always looked so morose, the man said, "Money is a test, and I have failed the test." In this sense, all of life is a test. Hopefully, most of us respond to the normal tests of life with honesty, with integrity, with humility. But then there are bigger challenges. Since we are living during a pandemic, let's talk about sickness. I sympathize with anyone who has to go through a serious illness, but it is still a test. We fail it if all we do is complain, if we become bitter, if we become angry at God as if God had specifically decreed that we should suffer, if we become critical of those around us as if they were responsible, or become resentful as if God favored someone else and not us. We ace the test if our illness makes us more appreciative of the health we enjoyed, or more sympathetic to the pain faced by those in a similar or worse situation. We ace the test if we can bring ourselves and those around us to laugh instead of fear, to grow closer together rather than to push away. Sickness can be an education, not one that any of us would choose, but one through which we can become wiser. And every kind of adversity can be a test. And here too, our tradition is filled with such examples. When he was young, David had the skill to defeat Goliath. He solidified the Israelite kingdom under his leadership, but he gave in to temptation. You've all heard about Bathsheba. Not all of his children appreciated him so much. Jeremiah was a powerful prophet, but he also despaired and said, "Oh, that I had a refuge in the wilderness, that I might leave and go away from the people." Elijah was a powerful prophet, but he too cried out to God and said, "I have had enough, O Lord, take my life." So if you're having a bad time during the pandemic, you're in good company. Some of our most powerful teachers in the Bible wanted to give in, and they were ready to die. But they didn't. They had moments where they felt hopeless, but they recovered from them. I promise you, I too have had moments when I thought, what's the point of all this? But those moments don't define me, and they don't have to define you either. We will be angry and depressed and have moments where we feel like a failure. And I say we because I am not immune to that. You also may have moments like that, but you can overcome them, and you will go on. And when you do, you are a child of Abraham because you have been tested and you have passed. Some people will do better than pass. Many of our healthcare workers who hold the hands of coronavirus patients and others whose families cannot be with them, who care for the elderly whose families cannot be with them, who risk their own health while providing compassion and healing, they will do better than most of us. But that's not my field, and it's not meant for everyone. Most of us don't have to be heroes to pass the test. Some people will not live through this. Many have died. More will die before it ends. Hopefully none of us. But we all know our eventual end. Who by fire and who by water, who by earthquake and who by plague. I was not a friend, was until recently barely an acquaintance of Brian Granquist, who played the organ right over there in a sanctuary service. But I saw him and talked with him regularly during the initial months of the virus, and his death from COVID-19 is a reminder for each of us in Beth Yeshurun that it could have been you or me. Sometimes life is a trial. What matters is how we face it. That is what is in our control. We don't know what will come to us in this year, but if we face it with caring and compassion and concern for others, and with concern for God's vision for our world, if we pass the test, then we will be worthy of the blessing God gave Abraham. For the Torah tells us that God said to Abraham that he would be blessed, and that by Abraham's descendants, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. That is a blessing worth receiving and worth striving for. So in this new year, I wish you the blessing of good health, that the coronavirus pass over your homes and over your loved ones, that we might soon see an effective vaccine. But may we all also attain a new appreciation and respect for all those who kept us healthy, and the vast network of individuals in transport and service who have enabled us to manage this difficult time. May you find joy in life to outweigh all the bad news we face. And may you pass through this trial and pass the test. Amen.